His petition was approved. But unfortunately, they said because of the Muslim ban, he's not allowed to bring his family here. The kid doesn't want to separate from his mother. The husband doesn't want to separate from his wife. We feel there's a lot of fear in our communities where people are scared. People are worried. They love their families. We feel discriminated against. Shame on this country.
Israel literally controls a captive population upon which it tests weapons that are paid for with our tax dollars. And then American police are trained in turn by the Israelis to use these same tactics and these same weapons on our own population.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is on over 30 cable stations from Maine to New York City. Tens of thousands of Syrians in the southwest part of the country are running to the borders of Jordan and Israel. They have been facing relentless bombing by Assad and his Russian allies. Jordan has been generous in the past, taking in 600,000 people, but the border is closed now. Israel has taken in no Syrians at all. A Syrian doctor, Dr. Zahir Zalhul, writes, 250,000 people are now out in the open. Some 65 children have been killed in the Daraa region in the last few weeks. This is a photo of a white helmet, Suleiman al-Mufalani, killed on July 6th by Russian or Syrian bombing. People of goodwill are calling on Jordan and Israel to open the borders. More about this at peace.org. In the days after the Supreme Court decision that gave Trump a free hand for his Muslim ban, there were demonstrations of anger in cities across the U.S. We covered the demonstration in Hartford, Connecticut, including a talk by one young Muslim leader who had a particularly heart-wrenching story.
And so as we gather here today, we have to be mindful that this is even though a Muslim ban fee, we're disappointed, even though that we seek this as a setback. But remember how bad was the Muslim ban one, and how the outrage that swept the nation, how you and most of you were at the Bradley airport demonstrating and saying no to that Muslim ban that created havoc across this nation, and we forced the administration to go back to the drawing board to make exceptions, to change many of the procedures and this law. But we're still saying no today. This is their third version. They try to camouflage it by including other countries like North Korea and Venezuela. I mean, we know that that's just trying to change the topic, trying to make us look away from the real issue, which is discriminating against Muslims, as Trump himself declared it on the campaign trail when he said that he wanted to ban Muslims from entering this country. Ever. No Muslim ban ever! No Muslim ban ever! No Muslim ban ever! I would like to give the mic to Alicia. Alicia, she is the Executive Director of CARE Connecticut. She's a young leader among the Muslim community. We would like to welcome her and support her in this fight for justice not only for the Muslim community, but for everyone. Alicia.
Thank you. So, as Minji said, my name is Alicia Strong. That's A-L-I-C-I-A, Strong, S-T-R-O-N-G. So, when I heard that the Supreme Court, when the Supreme Court had ruled on this ban, I was outraged, and I think we were all outraged. But one of the things that has outraged me the most is that Donald Trump has propagated this idea that Islam hates America, that somehow Muslims are less American. And I'm here to tell you that that's not true. In fact, I have my father, he's right there. I want to give him a shout out. My father and also my mother are veterans of the United States Air Force. If it does not get more American than that. I was raised by 2 Air Force veterans. So we're living in a difficult time. We are living in a difficult time, and it is essential that we come together and that we support each other. And I said this earlier at a rally, and I really want to hit this point home again for everybody watching and listening. Legality does not equal morality. Just because something is legal does not make it moral. You know, decades ago, people who looked like me, Africans, were brought to this country and legally held as property. Legally held as property. So it's essential that we stand up and make sure that our laws reflect our morals, not the other way around.
Yes.
May peace and blessings be upon everyone. This is kind of personal to me. For one, I was a victim of hate crimes. For two, my uncle is currently overseas abroad. He was in Yemen, an American citizen. His kid is an American citizen. He fell in love with his wife, who's a Yemeni resident. Oh, sure. I'm usually loud and clear, but I'll make sure. All right. So again, this is a touchy subject for me, so it's a little bit hard. Eventually, he ended up going to a country as a refugee American who took him in because he loved his wife. They started raising up the prices on his rent, so on and so forth. This is what a lot of people are facing, whether they're going to have a house on their head or food to feed their families. He ended up going to Egypt because he couldn't afford being in Djibouti anymore. Again, he's an American citizen. His son's an American citizen, and they're stuck as refugees right now in Egypt. He ended up, we filed all the paperwork. His petition was approved, but unfortunately, they said because of the Muslim ban, he's not allowed to bring his family here. The kid doesn't want to separate from his mother. The husband doesn't want to separate from his wife. We feel there's a lot of fear in our communities. People are scared. People are worried. They love their families. We feel discriminated against. Shame on this country. Shame on those voters. Shame on them. Shame. We have to go out and vote. We have to organize. We have to be one. Shame on the Republican parties that come to some of my rallies and talk about hate, and they don't go out there and speak about this. Shame on these people. May God bless this country.
Shame.
Thank you. Oh, hold on. I also got a picture. So this is my uncle, right? This is his wife, and this is his son. They had bombs falling over their heads. American citizens. And they are not allowed to bring their mother here. American citizens. Shame on these people. There was a time in history where slavery was acceptable, right? We end up changing history, even though that we have a lot of discrimination going on. This is how we have to change it. We have to vote. We have to run for office. Thank you.
I'm here today in solidarity as a woman who respects the history of exclusion to citizens of my gender. I'm here today as a Jew who remembers the exclusion of my foremothers and forefathers, all asylum seekers on board the St. Louis that set sail from Hamburg, Germany in 1939.
That's right.
They were turned away from the shores of the United States and forced to return to Europe. Some found refuge in their return, but 254 of those people are known to have perished in the Holocaust. I'm here today as a graduate of the nation's public school education system that taught and still teaches that the United States of America is a nation that welcomes the immigrant, that we are stronger for it. I was taught that our government is built on ideals of acceptance, justice, and moral vision.
See the full rally by going to our website and clicking on the black button to get to our YouTube channel. As we record, an Israeli court has suspended, if only for a time, Israeli plans to bulldoze a village belonging to the Jahalin Bedouin in Palestine. The small village of Khan al-Ahmar is shown here by the red arrow. The Israelis want the land for a settlement. They intend to bulldoze the land, including the school, and have the Bedouin move west to an area overlooking the Jerusalem garbage dump. I'm not at all kidding. Just imagine the smells and the sounds of the huge trucks going in and out at all hours. 10 members of Congress have signed a letter of protest. Busloads of people came to Washington, D.C. for the Baqee demonstration against the Saudi monarchy. Despite a rainstorm, they gathered in front of the Saudi embassy, and then many hundreds or thousands marched to the White House. They chiefly were concerned with the Saudi regime's destruction of Muslim religious heritage, like that of the Baqee graveyard. But speakers also condemned the Saudi war on Yemen, its jailings of its critics, and the arrest of the leading Saudi feminists. We have time to show talks by two of the speakers.
It was a barren desert until oil was discovered in 1938 by the US-controlled Caltex, making billionaires of just one family in Saudi Arabia. By royal decree, future kings could only be from that one family. That was easy. For starters, the founder Saud had 22 wives, 45 declared sons, thousands of grandchildren, and how many daughters? Heck, who keeps track of daughters in Saudi Arabia? Luxurious chateaus, sprawling palaces, grand yachts, gluttonous parties with drugs and prostitution are the hallmark of this Muslim royal family of Saudi Arabia. However, regular Saudis have to forced to strictly follow Wahhabism as enforced by the dreaded mutawwas of Saudi Arabia. Wahhabism, not Islam, is the religion of Saudi Arabia. Wahhabism, not Islam, is the religion of Saudi Arabia. Palestine, the world was aghast as Israeli snipers surrounding the open-air prison called Gaza shot protesters with live ammunition, even though they were far from the fence. While visiting New York City, someone told the Palestinians to shut up and stop complaining. And that was Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. Yemen, schools bombed, hospitals bombed, Doctors Without Borders bombed, wedding and funerals bombed. Worst of all, cluster bombs dropped in the marketplaces by the jets of Saudi Arabia. Humanitarian crisis created by intentional targeting of food resources, bombing ports of Hudaydah, agricultural lands, even fishing boats by the pilots of Saudi Arabia. UN stated over 10,000 Yemenis dead, 80% in need of emergency assistance. UNICEF, one child dying every 10 minutes. World Health Organization, cholera endemic affecting 1 million. And therefore, Amnesty and Human Rights Watch have said war crimes have been committed by the government of Saudi Arabia. Activists like Raif Badawi for blogging, juveniles like Ali Nimr for tweeting were tortured in jails, while there were 138 executions just last year alone in Saudi Arabia. And yet, serving its second term in the United Nations Human Rights Council is Saudi Arabia. 9 million migrant workers covered by the official term kafala are imprisoned in a modern-day slave camp called Saudi Arabia. And yet, elected as a deputy member of the International Labour Organization was Saudi Arabia. Vogue magazine featured a glamorous princess behind the wheel of a car as evidence of reforms, while avoiding any mention of the 11 female activists who were recently arrested and may face death sentence in Saudi Arabia. And yet serving as a member of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women is a country with the worst record on women's rights, and that is Saudi Arabia.
It is not a reformist regime. There is nothing reformist about this regime. It is one of, if not the most repressive regimes in the world, that is taking its perverted form of Islam and spreading it all over. And that's why we see Al-Qaeda. That's why we see ISIS. That's why we see terrorism, because the terrorism is starting from the Saudis and spreading around the world because of the Saudi regime. As a mother, as a grandmother, I look at the women and I say, how can we stand what the Saudis are doing in Yemen? How can we watch it happen? How can we know every day that not only is this the greatest catastrophe on earth right now, according to the United Nations, but as the Saudis and the Emirates are attacking the port of Hudaida, where over 80% of the food and the medicines and the fuel comes in. We know what this means for the poor people of Yemen who are already suffering. And we know that the U.S. government is providing them with the bombs that are dropping on the Yemeni people.
Now back to homecoming at the Tree of Life Education Fund in Old Lyme. First with some Palestinian music, and then Lynn Mason, who went on several of the trips of the Tree of Life to Palestine, Israel.
And Lynn Mason joined us in the fall of last year for our second trade union journey, and is now leading the advocacy charge in District 4. Thank you.
Hi, welcome today. My name is Lynn Mason, and I am a union leader of Laborers International Union of North America. I've worked with John Fussell for 12 years. He's our blessed union attorney. And when John shared with me last spring that he had been deeply involved in the fight to free Palestine, I was immediately captivated and thought, why haven't you told me this in the last 12 years? But so at John's invitation, my husband Steve and I joined the 2017 Trade Labor Delegation to Palestine, where we met with labor leaders, professors, writers, artists, families, activists from many, many different venues. My life now is divided between the time before I was in Palestine into the time after I was in Palestine. It truly was, as Mary said, a transformative experience and pulled me deep, deep into the hearts of some of the finest people I've ever met, and certainly into the deepest struggle I've ever entered. So we traveled with 3 covenants that's asked of all travelers with the Tree of Life. And our first covenant was to educate ourselves prior to the trip. As to the issues and the current state on the ground in Palestine, this itself was a mind-blowing experience. And I'd been active in many issues my whole life, and I was just, I felt horrified and humiliated at how little I knew about what was going on there. I had always thought, it's just so far away and so big, and what impact could I possibly have? I should stay local. And when I started delving into this thing which looked too complicated, I realized that it's not so complicated. And the root of the problem in Palestine, like every other struggle I'd ever been involved with, was injustice, greed, corruption, and an utter callous disregard for human life and human dignity. I entered a country with two sets of laws which are applied unequally by, yes, the apartheid government of Israel. I traveled two sets of highways, the good ones, the straight ones for Israelis, and the roundabout ones with all the checkpoints for the Palestinians. I witnessed and experienced the unholy checkpoints, and they are unholy, through which Palestinians must pass constantly on highways, but also every day to get to underpaid, unsafe jobs, which they may or may not get paid for, and they have no recourse to any kind of redress for that. It's just too bad you didn't get paid. And then there was the separation wall, which I can only describe as one of the 7 abominations of hell. It's horrific. As a delegation, we did in one day, just part. John drove this one, thank you, John. We kept the schedule, just part of a schedule that a Palestinian worker would keep during a day. And by the end of it, we were utterly exhausted, all of us. I drank one of those 5-hour shooters just to keep going, you know? I mean, it was and we were exhausted. And I learned that for workers, leaving the house at 3 a.m. so you can get to the checkpoint, so you can get through it before it closes, and then not returning home to your family until after dark takes a terrible, terrible toll on the Palestinian families. And this is part of the greater plan of the oppression and of Israel's nefarious plan. I learned a Palestinian child can be sentenced to 20 years in jail for throwing a stone, even if he didn't throw it. I saw a very strong man cry as he relayed the inhumane conditions and the indignities he suffered while in prison. One of the most horrifying things that Sister Bayan spoke to, I learned, was the reciprocal relationship between the U.S. in its regard to the military occupation and weapons. Israel literally controls a captive population upon which it tests weapons that are paid for with our tax dollars. And then American police are trained in turn by the Israelis to use these same tactics and these same weapons on our own population, again, unequally against those of color and those of non-Christian faith. But I also met people so resilient, intelligent, kind, and generous that the second covenant, to travel in humility, was no problem. It seemed to me they walked on a different plane, these people we met with. It was a plane in which continuous struggle for justice, this is my interpretation, that continuous struggle had enabled them to access a deeper part of themselves, one in which anger, hatred, despair, and complaining didn't rule. It might have been there, but it didn't rule. Rather, a deep, deep love of their exquisite country and a commitment to justice, freedom, and the right of return, and a better world for their country and for their children. Humility was not a problem there. So I'm now in my post-time in Palestine life, dealing with the most challenging of the covenants, as David will tell you all, the commitment to take action and do something positive with what I learned on that blessed delegation. Despite the inner voices that say it's too big, I don't have time, our Connecticut politicians are progressive on everything except Palestine, I will never get anywhere, I just feel I need to honor that spirit I met in Palestine. I've been honored with a position on the TOLEF Board of Directors, and accepted the role of District Advocacy Coordinator for the 4th Congressional District. So if any of you out there are from the 4th District, come see me after this. Steve and I have written many letters, made phone calls, attended events and protests. We've increased our monthly financial contribution to TOLEF, and we're now assembling a coalition of District 4 constituents to meet with Congressman Jim Himes to discuss and share our views on H.R. 4391. I hope somebody else will be speaking about that, but it's landmark, groundbreaking legislation. I'm doing my best to honor the wisdom I encountered in Palestine by not getting bogged down in despair, but in looking for hope. I see hope in the courage and the bravery of those in Gaza. I see it in those who are leading and championing the 4391 campaign. I see it in the Durham, North Carolina, which is the first U.S. city to ban Israeli training of its police force, and I hope it's not the last. And right as I was starting to get my coalition together, I noticed the congressman was on his way to Israel to celebrate the 70th anniversary of something. I wrote a very impassioned letter and not having time to wade through, sent it to his house. And I just received a handwritten response from the congressman. So Shelley received the letter you were in the Serengeti, I believe, that day. So I think something may have gotten through, and I'm going to take that as a sign of hope. And I also find the sign of hope that despite being questioned all the way here today, Brother Kansia has made it through much travel to be with us. I'll end with this. During the days of struggle to end apartheid in South Africa, because I do see so many similarities between what I saw in Palestine and what I knew, not that I ever was in South Africa, but certainly read and heard about it. There's so many similarities that I thought this was an appropriate quote from Bobby Kennedy. Each time a person stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Here's to the ripples. We can make ripples in this room. Here's to all of us working together. Thanks for listening, and free Palestine. And let's keep going. Thank you.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.